the Property Pod. Welcome to the Property Pod with Moneyweb. The property sector is an ever-changing sector. And in this podcast series, your host, Suren Naidu, chats to movers and shakers in the property industry.
Hello and welcome to the Property Pod, South Africa's premier property investor podcast, right here on Moneyweb. Also as a video on our Moneyweb YouTube channel called Moneyweb TV. On our latest podcast, we're zoning into how the commercial property sector is doing in South Africa. It's quite a broad question, but is it all about the boom in the Western Cape and Cape Town? We look at this now on our latest podcast with Rob Kane. Rob is the CEO of Boxwood Property Fund, and he's also the chair and longtime chair at it of the Cape Town City Centre Improvement District, or the Cape Town CCID. And they are one of the most successful city improvement districts in South Africa, if not the most successful. So, Rob, we've had you on the podcast a few years ago, but good to have you back on our podcast and vodcast.
Morning, Suren. Thanks very much. Good to be here.
Rob, we interviewed you, as I mentioned the last time, as the Cape Town CCID chair. You are still the chair there, but I want to chat a little bit and get a little bit of an idea of your day job or your main job, and that is the boss of Boxwood Property Fund. Can you tell me a little bit about the company? How's the company doing? I know it's based out of Cape Town, but it does have properties and exposure to other parts of the country.
Sure. Thanks, Suren. We started Boxwood about 6.5, 7 years ago. And at that stage, we bought a portfolio of about 900 million office property in Cape Town CBD. And if you remember, COVID didn't come that soon after that, so that timing wasn't maybe as good as it could have been. However, we did work that to our advantage. We've got a very young, dynamic team, very hardworking, very experienced, and we're now at just under 5 billion. And we've diversified quite nicely away from offices. Although I must say the office work and the refurbishment, redevelopment work we did has paid off handsomely for us.
5 billion, that's quite significant considering it's coming off that timing of COVID, as you mentioned. We'll get to Cape Town in a moment, but where else is the company invested in? I know you're in Johannesburg currently, but I understand you also have some exposure in KwaZulu-Natal.
Sure. About 15% of our properties are in KZN. You only have to look at the port and how close it is to Gauteng to realize how important KZN will be. And interestingly, I listened to your podcast with Mary Collins about KZN over the weekend, and you can see from that podcast how much is going on there. So there's lots of activity in other nodes. The other thing we've got is a lot of property in Gauteng. Gauteng is the economic node of the country. I don't know what percentage of the economy is driven from Gauteng, but it's a lot. So we have been buying here, predominantly big box retail and logistics.
And you said you've diversified away from office. I'm sure you do have some office exposure, but which area is there? Do you invest in multiple property type of assets, or is there a clear focus towards industrial or warehousing?
Interestingly, Suren, the diversification has come from actually increasing the asset base rather than from selling out any particular properties. The original portfolio of 900 million still sits there. And I think we've added one property to that, fairly significant in size. So that's about 30% of our portfolio. And then we have about 20% is in its big box retail. Then the balance which is 50%, which is logistics, warehousing, and a little bit of industrial. And that's spread through the 3 provinces. Our focus really is in the really strong economic nodes. So that's Cape Town, Pretoria, and Joburg. The sort of KZN particularly focused around logistics. So that's worked very well for us so far.
Well, logistics is the sexy or almost I say the in-demand booming sector, as it were, even through COVID, and possibly accelerated due to COVID with online shopping and that sort of thing. But since you invested in these three main provinces, I would think you have an ear to the ground in terms of sentiment in the market. What's your general feeling about the commercial property sector? Are we going to be okay? I know interest rates, there's a little bit of caution now with interest rate potentially going up in the wake of the Middle East situation and the contagion, as it were, to other economies around the world. But, we just got a fuel levy relief that saw the rand improvement as well. So there is a bit of a buffer there. So South Africa is also in a better economic space than it was, say, 4 or 5 years ago. What's your general sentiments on the commercial property sector? And you're welcome to zone in to specific sectors that you play in.
Okay. I think logistics, as you say, is strong, and I believe it'll remain strong. I think some of the pricing perhaps is getting very tight. It's difficult to see value in some of the assets that are available for purchase. And I think the rentals are quite full. But the rentals are really backed by the cost of the land and cost of steel. And those are the two dominant factors in industrial. So that dictates what your new build cost is. And it's quite surprising how much those prices have run. But when you dig underneath, it's not that people are making ridiculous profits. That's what it's costing us to develop and to product onto the market. Town planning processes are long, so it means you have to hold the land for a long time. So that pushes up the land price. So I think logistics is fairly stable. If we can get our two ports running efficiently, obviously that would be Durban and Cape Town, I think that will help tremendously. And I think it'll stimulate the economy quite materially. In terms of retail, we don't invest, or mainly because we don't understand, the really big shopping centres. If we bought those, we would most certainly make a mess of them. So the smaller shopping centres we can do, and the big box retail we understand very well. But I think your P grade retail will do well, and also your low LSM. But I think the portion in the middle is going to struggle, and perhaps some shopping centres that were built in the last 15 years maybe should not have been built at all. And I think those are going to struggle. So there'll be a bit of consolidation there. And then in offices, it very much depends where you are. Cape Town, we're seeing huge demand. I understand that North Durban Mhlanga area is actually very, very strong and difficult to find space there if you need it as an office user. And then we are seeing a bit of a revival in Gauteng, but it's dominated by a few nodes. And there are not too many of them. They are gaining in value, and it's those nodes that are getting top rentals. So I think there's still quite a bit of washout coming in terms of Gauteng's office market. And I think the next few years that'll play itself out. But Shirin, we're talking briefly about the Middle East crisis. I remember just before we went away on the hard lockdown, we were sitting as a team. Everybody was really despondent. And I wrote up on the whiteboard all that I survived. And I think the average age in the office, apart from me, of course, is about 34. And I wrote up everything I could think of, all the stock market crashes, swine flu, which actually didn't affect me personally, and AIDS. There's just the global financial crisis, 2008. And I think this crisis we have in the Middle East is just that. It's just another crisis. Very sad, but we had the Russia-Ukraine war, but that's been going on a long time. Everybody thought that would end quickly, but here we are. We're still trading. And so I think perhaps people place too much emphasis on what's going wrong in the market. And while you can't ignore that, you also have to look at where your opportunities are and focus on those. So I've no doubt as a country we will strengthen. The last 5 years, we've done a lot. The government has worked hard, and I think the GNU has been a good part of that, to restore confidence in this country as an investment nation. And if we look at the residential, particularly in Cape Town, the influx of foreigners is extraordinary. I mean, it's anecdotal, but I've been told that 40% of buyers on the Atlantic seaboard are foreign. So it kind of makes you think, well, maybe they're seeing something that we don't see. And when those buyers come in, I know there's a bit of resentment towards them, but we have to remember those are the guys that spend a lot of money in restaurants. They drive around a lot. They go and see things. They spend money. They actually support an awful lot of our economy. So we should look at them really, and in my views, we should be grateful that they are coming into the country because they bring a lot of disposable income with them. So I don't know if that gives you a bit of a flavor for what my thinking is.
It does. Thank you for that pragmatic comments there, but also you hear the positivity. You are based out of Cape Town, and Cape Town clearly knows how to sell itself as well. So it's good to hear, a company based out of Cape Town talking about the positives for other parts of the country as well. But it's interesting you mentioned some of the comments around commercial property, some sentiments expressed by the likes of the listed counters like Growthpoint and Redefine around specific nodes like Sandton and Waterfall City in Gauteng. But it's interesting also that that comment around foreign investors, because Growthpoint mentioned in an event that I went to recently that 20% of buyers in a new residential tower in Sandton is actually from Africa. And there's quite a number of African investors investing in the Cape Town property market, not just those with pounds and dollars. Rob, what are some of your big property developments and investments currently as Boxwood Property Fund?
Okay. You may or may not remember, Suren, but when we started Boxwood, we bought a 900 million rand portfolio of practically very badly run and very distressed properties in Cape Town CBD. They were all offices, and they were distressed, but they all had very good fundamentals. They all had parking, and we could see that we could rejuvenate them without too much work. So we spent a lot of money on that, particularly in COVID, and in a sense it was a bit of a luck because all the buildings were empty, so we could make as much noise as we liked. And so those buildings that were sort of previously quite distressed, I think our vacancies now or our occupancy is probably over 98%. It's actually very strong over the whole portfolio. So the work we've done in upgrading those buildings has certainly paid off. And we've then bought 2 warehouses in Brackengate and combined them and did a bit of redevelopment work there, and that's settling down very nicely. We have bought, you probably don't know it, an area in Tokai, southern suburbs of Cape Town, called South Palms, and it was really 2 properties, an industrial park of about 44 units, and then a 16,000 square meter retail outlet. We've refurbished the industrial, and I think it was quite tough on the tenants. If any of them are listening, we're very grateful that they put up with us. Apparently, as you hear about AC and BC, apparently they have BB, which is before Boxwood. So we're trying to take that as a compliment, but I'm not sure it is. But we refurbished that with them in the building and moved them around, and they were very gracious with it. And that's been a huge success. What was probably one of the ugliest buildings I've ever owned is now settled down and is performing very well. And we're about to swap over into the retail, and we're putting a lot of work and effort into that. So that's on. And then closer to the city centre, quite some time ago, we bought 3 buildings in the city, and we've had a note in our diary every 6 months, and we've sat in the coffee shop opposite and looked at it and thought, okay, what are we going to do? And we haven't had any clue until about 18 months ago. And then we looked at it and we said, okay, now it's time. So we've done a lot of work since then, and shortly we'll be submitting to council and to Heritage. And initial indications are they really appreciate what we've done and our attention to detail, particularly on the ground floor and the greening. I think that'll be a very, very good attraction for the city and a very good value add. And also, given its location, it's a very dominant location, and it'll be a very large building, about 1.7 billion. We spend an awful lot of time and effort on the facade. I think it'll be, well, in our view, the most attractive building in Cape Town. I'm sure there are lots of other property owners that will argue that, but we can see once it's up, and then we'll discuss it. So we're going into council, and we'll go through that process and then start construction.
So another few cranes are potentially coming up in the Cape Town CBD. Not that there are less cranes. There's a whole lot, so more to see in the future there. So looking forward to hearing about that, Rob. Rob, just from a broader Boxwood perspective, you call the company Boxwood Property Fund. Have you ever considered listing on the JSE?
So you know I did that once. And it's very exciting. It's very exciting. It's good fun. But I think that may be a decision down the road. I think at the moment we're at 5 billion. I think if we were going to list, we'd want to be larger. And that's a decision us as a management team will make. But I think it'll be the young people in our office that drive that. I'll be quite happy to sit in a corner and drink coffee and hopefully give them some advice. But we intend Boxwood to be around for a very long time, and I guess we're far more interested in the returns that we get. We're very return focused. And so my belief is property is a long-term game. We very seldom sell buildings. So provided we can give good returns, may not be a reason to list. But I think that's down the line.
Thank you for that. I just thought I'd ask because the listed property space is in a much better spot as well. Some of the counters have returned to premium, trading at premium. So it is a better time to list. But let's see what happens. Rob, you are a CEO of a property fund, but you also have played a key role over the last 10, 15 years at the Cape Town CCID, chair in that role, I understand, for that period of time. So can you give us, we had one of your colleagues chat last year, update from the city report, that annual city report that you guys bring out. But how has it been leading the CID? Because it has done tremendous work in the CBD.
Okay. Corinne, we've been going 25 years now. We started off with fairly humble beginnings, but we now employ directly and indirectly probably about 750 people. Our CEO, Tasso Evangelinos, to be honest, he's the key driver. He's got a very dedicated management team, and it's extraordinary the work that they do. I think most people walking around the city have no idea how grateful they should be to Tasso and his team. I think one of the successes is that we really stuck to our knitting. We haven't gone off and done a whole lot of things. We decided what was really important for the city, and we focused on that. And predominantly that was safety. And the city is safe now. You can walk around it at night. The other was cleaning and beautification, and I think we've got that right. And then the third, which came probably about 10 years ago, was to spend more money on marketing and communications. And that's helped. And then the fourth is social development. And that's always been a key element for us. And really your security and your social development are one and the same thing. You can't split them. Another success factor has been the board. We have a very strong board, very vociferous. And that's what we like. Everybody contributes, and maybe the three key success factors there is that everybody has to own property in the city. So we're all vested. The other thing is nobody gets any fees. To my knowledge, no director of the CID has ever received a fee. So you're there because you want to, and you're there because you want the success of the city. And then the third is if you're not contributing, then it's probably not a good place for you. So I think those three things have given us a very strong board, and it's our job really to support Tasso and his team. And then also a really big thing for us has been we've worked well with the city for so many years, and we've been very grateful for that. It's been a very, very good partnership. Probably the only good public-private partnership that I know of. And we work closely with them, and it's been successful. One can see the benefits. Probably a very good indication of that is I was looking at the stats a while ago. In 2006, the value of property in the city centre was about 6 billion. A couple of years ago, we looked again, and it was at about 43 billion. So that's enormous growth over a fairly short period of time. And there's so many spin-off benefits for that. And an awful lot of it is jobs. Every time you see a crane going up, it's a new development. But you're probably employing a few hundred people on the construction site. And we know from stats that for every one person on a construction site, there's probably another 7 people making tiles, making cement in the quarries and so on. So it's been a good story for the whole city.
Definitely a multiplier effect there. Tremendous success of the Cape Town CCID, but the legislation in Cape Town works in its favor with the number of CCID or city improvement districts. I understand it's around 50. I heard the Deputy Mayor, Eddie Andrews, speak at a SAPAR convention a few years ago, and I was shocked to realize that it has so many city improvement districts. How much has been invested into the CBD as a result of the CCID? I know you talked about value, how property values has grown, and that's an element of, the boost in value. But I know your annual report delayed by a year, but it's meant to be comprehensive. What are some of the latest stats? How's the investment looking at? Because we're just talking about the CBD, the center part of the city bowl, as it were. So it includes massive developments like, the V&A waterfront and even areas outside the city. This is the core CBD.
Yeah. Well, the start of the CID was 25 years ago, as of November last year. And the key was that property owners in the area were saying, well, do we sell up or do we get stuck in and fix it? That was the choice. It was very, very stark. There were a lot of key drivers there, and we're very grateful to them, people who worked on it before the current board was there. In fact, some of them are still on the board. But it was that decision. Do we go elsewhere and invest, or do we fix what we've got? So that's been the key driver. And that driver has enabled other people to come to the city and think, okay, this is a good place to put my money. And it's driven a lot of confidence, to the extent that at the moment, I think we probably have about 9 billion of development on the go. And if you drive around the city, those cranes are everywhere. And so I think that it's driven confidence, and it's just that delivery that people want.
You talked about key elements of success, but I'm also thinking about there are some successful city improvement districts in Gauteng, Sandton Central, for example, and in KZN and Durban. But what advice would you give areas wishing to either set up or instituting a new CID or reviving them? Because there are areas in Johannesburg, because the legislation is not the same like it is in Cape Town and KZN, where that vested interest and passion about investing in your community might not be as strong if you frank about it. Like in Sandton Central, you have the listed companies maybe part of the CID, but not necessarily all the big businesses that are within there. So you mentioned also contributing beyond just being part of a board. That's financial contribution.
Sure. I think the key element in the legislation that allows Cape Town and I think it's 53 CIDs to be successful is that it goes to a vote in a particular geographical area, and it's literally divided by the center line of a road. And all the people in that area need to vote in favor. And I think we need 50% or 50 plus 1% of the vote, and then that becomes law. And then it is mandatory for all ratepayers to pay the CID levy. Whereas I think in other municipalities, Gauteng and to a lesser extent Durban, it's not mandatory. So then it's difficult, Suren, if you have a building next to me and you're paying your levy and I'm not. It's just not fair. Whereas I think if you look in the city, and I think for the last 15, 20 years, I don't think I've had anybody say to me, you know what, that CID levy is far too high, because that's a levy that drives an awful lot of delivery for them. So a key thing for me is, can that legislation be changed, or can it be incorporated elsewhere so that it is mandatory? And if you have that, and then you have a good, strong board of property owners, then I think you'll be successful. That's the key drivers. But it is a legislation that the City Council put in place that has protected the CIDs and allowed them to get very strong.
Thank you for that. Rob, before you go, you are in Johannesburg. Are you looking for any further acquisitions in the economic hub?
Yeah, I love Gauteng. My previous business, probably 70% of it was up here. I like the business culture. It's a very dynamic area. Every time I get off the plane, I get irritated because I see different buildings going up and things. It's a good place to do business. It has its issues, without a doubt, but it doesn't stop it being the economic driver of the country, and I don't think we should forget that. So we're very happy to acquire in Gauteng.
Rob, we'll have to leave it there. That was Rob Kane. He's the CEO of Boxwood Property Fund, and he also chairs the Cape Town City Centre Improvement District.
Thanks for listening to the Moneyweb Property Pod with Suren Naidu. To listen to more episodes, go to moneyweb.co.za or the Moneyweb app and follow Moneyweb News for daily updates. Follow Suren on Twitter @Suren Naidu for more of his property industry content and other business stories.